Hi, good evening. We're going to make a start. Good evening. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Please be advised this meeting will be recorded and posted on the Council's YouTube channel. Can all those speaking ensure you switch off your microphones before addressing the meeting, and remember to switch it off when you are finished speaking. Please be aware that we are still in a pre-election period, and I will encourage everyone to stick to the topic at hand and to avoid straying into any political discussion. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from our Chair, Councillor Lauren Dingsdale, Councillor Dominic Mabang. Are there any other apologies?
No other apologies.
Thank you. Item number 2, urgent business. There are no urgent business tonight. Item number 3, declaration of interest. Does any member have any personal or financial interest to declare on any item on the agenda? I see none. Item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting. So we've got the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of October 2024. Are members happy to agree the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you. The main item of on the agenda tonight, item number 5, we'll have the carbon neutral plan, the year 3 update. We're asked to consider the report on the carbon neutral plan and to make recommendations to the executive if necessary. The report will be presented by Councillor Avolokar, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Climate Action, Sustainability and Transport, Pippa Hack, the Director of Region, George Brown, Principal Sustainability Officer. May I invite officers to present the report, and then we will bring members in for question. Set out the main updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to share with you the progress in our delivery of the carbon neutral plan and reduction in both borough and operational emissions. And this can be exemplified by, in the appendix on page 38, you will see the overall reduction since the baseline of 2920. So in terms of operational emissions, whilst there's been 2.2% reduction in the last financial year, in fact, there's been a total of 30% reduction since 2920. And then the borough emissions have reduced by 2% this year, and we have the 10th lowest per capita emissions in London. The report also sets out some examples of success and also commitment. And so my colleagues here today behind me, so Ryan, Kate and Richard, as well as obviously Debbie, are here in case you've got any questions in relation to the work that is being done by some of the biggest emitters in terms of waste, housing and transport. But there are successes. So if we were to look at the work that I do in terms of the asset portfolio, we've secured overall 6.9 million of public sector decarbonisation funding, which will deliver over 1,000 tonnes of CO2 savings. So we are always looking for external funding opportunities in order to support the Council's CMP ambition, as well as obviously through the Greenwich Builds programme, continuing to build net zero homes where we're directly delivering ourselves. And I think what I'm going to do is pass over to George so that he can just explain to you the process that we've gone through, and that this is an annual review so that you understand the data, how we do it, and why we are certain, if you like, of the calculations that we've made. But also to note that the reductions, it's not a even reduction. So as I explained, we've got 30% overall in relation to operational emissions, but 2.2% in the last 12 months. And that's because it isn't a steady reduction, because there'll be different initiatives that make a bigger impact depending on which ones we're pursuing or continuing to pursue. So that's why you won't see that even reduction. Okay, thank you, George.
So thanks for having us. So just to sort of follow on from what Pip has said, the carbon neutral plan is in its second action plan. This was adopted early this year in February, And that was basically a big amount of work that all was in consultation with all the other departments, and we developed that action plan. It was adopted. This is the update against that adopted action plan. So in the Appendix B, there's a progress to date column where we have completed ongoing actions, etc. And what this is going to do is that it's going to take us up to 2025. So the action plan is structured basically into interim actions up to 2025. They're short-term actions that are meant to mobilise these wider actions, which we're calling areas of action up to 2030. And this is basically how we've structured our areas of action, and it's basically to mobilise in the short term, whilst also taking that longer-term strategic view. So once we've completed up those 2025 actions, we'll be undertaking another review of the carbon neutral plan, and then setting out a final action plan to take us up to 2030. And at this point, I'll probably just ask if welcome any questions on the action plan and its updates.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Pippa and Avril. Have members got any questions? Okay, I've got a question on the action plan. It wasn't exactly what I intended to see. What I was expecting to see was an action plan that sets out the, year on year. So I know this is to 2025, but what we expect to be for 2025 and some projection for 2030. That's what I was expecting, setting out the annual plan. But I'm not sure the reason why it's been presented like this. I'm sure you've got valid reason. Just want to understand a little bit better.
So last year, we took the action plan in its current state to scrutiny, and we recommended that we'd have these interim actions to 2025, but they are categorised under those areas of action to 2030. So we are taking that longer-term strategic view as well. These are also then sort of categorised into larger pieces of action in terms of the climate themes. So we do have an idea and understanding, because we've done the forecasting up to 2030, what the high areas of action are required to meet to 2030. But the smaller 2025 actions are things that can be delivered in the short term now to mobilise action. So we can't really commit to things such as doing another round of public sector decarbonisation scheme in 2028, when we absolutely have no idea what the criteria might be, because it has changed recently, and if there is any sort of level funding. Also recently has been required match funding. So again, it's that sort of lack of clarity in the longer term in that second half of the decade, where we can't actually commit to those sort of, nail down those sort of actions. Hence why we've committed up to 2025 with that subsequent review to take place.
Thank you. Have you got any other question on the, what I'll do, go on.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the detailed report. It's obviously bedtime reading on a number of evenings, so we'll keep it by the bedside. But in real terms, one, how do we compare with other local authorities in terms of our ambition? What are the resource implications in terms of funding our ambition in a climate of where the council is obviously looking to reduce its budgets? And would you agree with me that there's a bit of a conflict really between what we're doing, for instance, and while I totally support what the Mayor has done with regard to ULEZ and other projects, the manner in which the announcements about the Silvertown Tunnel, the charges, which are really quite nominal, the lack of additional buses, no bus lane, as I understand it, lorries are going to go through there, and no charges for lorries during the night, which, as I understand it, is a major number of lorries come through London overnight anyway. So does that challenge some of the issues you've identified in the report, and how can we resolve them in the longer term?
I'll start. I do think that there are some areas that, you know, perhaps we're not in sync. And certainly we made very strong representation to the borough. Unfortunately, I had promised to make that available to members, but because of pre-election period, I haven't been able to, but I think that it's going to be published anyway. The decision that was published, I think, yesterday or the day before, was not alongside what we would have liked to have seen at all. But yeah, it is a challenge, and we are yet to see the impact of that at some point. There are other challenges we have, and that is the economic situation we find ourselves and financial situation. Our ambition to hit the 2030 is challenged by serious logistics, you know, in terms of, if you like, even looking at our electrification of our fleet and getting Birchmere ready. So at the moment we've had a feasibility study that should be reporting to us next month, or January, yeah? And with any feasibility study, you know, you've got to then find the financial resources to put in place. In the meantime, what do we do when we're having some vehicles that are coming out of their sell-by dates? So there are challenges. I think there are also challenges in terms of, you know, on the one hand, we are really working hard, the team is working hard in housing to reduce the cost of temporary accommodation. And so we've been buying off-street properties. And so that's also going to create its own challenge, because those off-street properties at some point will need decarbonization or you know, some work. And again, that's a resource pressure. So I will let George give you some of the nitty-gritties. But yes, we have many challenges, and I think we're going to have to be realistic about, you know, our ability to hit the target, 2030.
So in terms of where we compare to against other local authorities, the reason why we included the per capita graph is because obviously not all local authorities have the same population or even population density and different type of built environment. So it's a good measure to sort of kind of like provide an apples for apples comparison essentially against the other local authorities. We place in the top 10th. We're number 10 out of the 33, including the City of London. And on top of that, I would say the top 7 to 10 are very marginally similar. There's barely any difference between those three councils. So I think we're one of the better performers in terms of regarding per capita emissions, and that is basically how best we can compare ourselves with other local authorities. Strategically, we've committed to a second action plan. Most other local authorities have declared a climate emergency. Most of them have put forward some sort of action plan. But as far as I'm aware, I'm not too sure if any other local authority has undertaken a review and then published a subsequent action plan, taking those lessons learned from their initial first strategic step, as it were. So in terms of where we are strategically and how we envision where we need to get, I think we're actually one of the better performers across London boroughs. In terms of resource implications, it's absolutely just the state of the case that we need more money to invest into decarbonisation projects, and we have to be quite astute with what limited resources that we have. Invest to save projects will obviously free up budget at a later time to reinvest in other decarbonisation projects, but it's a state of the circumstance, I guess, that we do have limited resources to be able to drive forward all the projects in the action plan. Last year we did have a little asterisk at the bottom of the action plan saying all of these initiatives are subject to available funding, and that still remains the case. In terms of Silvertown, I'll leave that to Ryan to discuss.
Sorry, just to say to members as well, for those that weren't here at the start, we've invited Debbie as well to the meeting, because this is one of our core priorities, and I know that Debbie knows that, but just in case there's any question directly to Debbie, so just wanted to say that in case, because I'm sure others are wondering. Debbie's here. So over to you, Ryan.
I think Councillor Lecow answered everything, so I probably don't need to say much more. Although there is a development consent order and there is a monitoring strategy that TfL, Riverlinks and RBG have signed up to in terms of post-implementation of the scheme. It monitors air quality, traffic volumes, public transport, river crossings, road capacity, queue lengths, everything you can think of, it monitors. And there are also triggers that will initiate the mayor to potentially have to make a decision about the output of the scheme. I was going to say that we have fed into the consultation. Speaking with TfL this week, there's further information that will come out next week about some tweaks to some of the price points. We put our case across, but because of pre-election period, can't really go into that today. But there are also public transport sort of mitigation and routing that they've committed to review alongside the tunnel opening with ourselves. And there is a 3-year monitoring plan in place already with the option to potentially extend it to 5 years, a part of the Silvertown Tunnel group, and it will be for the group to decide whether that monitoring continues. So it is very much about watch this space, same as it is, George was sort of speaking for transport and the carbon neutral plan in terms of, are we meeting our targets? We've also committed to review the transport strategy and all of the associated action plans next year. And it's unfair for George to have to take the brunt of that in terms of, he's enabling all of this and we're feeding all into it. So I think after next year, to review the output of all of our action plans and whether we're hitting our targets will then impede how he's getting on with his plan. I've digressed a bit, but I think, it's difficult to say, the DCO was written up quite a while ago. It has to be adhered to. But as we move forward, we'll continue to work with TfL to monitor the impacts post-opening of the tunnel.
Thank you, Ryan. John?
I just asked 2 supplementaries, if I might, Chair. What is DCO?
Development consent order.
Oh, great. Thanks
Sorry.
for that. In terms of the proposals or the plan that we've got before us this evening, I get the impression that the plans aren't actually funded up to 2030. So what are the financial resources required to meet our objectives in relation to meeting the targets in 2030? There seems to be very little information about that. And the other issue is we obviously have as yet not measured the implications of the Silvertown Tunnel. So is that going to be an added factor? So in addition to that, what are our mitigation what's the mitigation plan for us to ensure that we meet the plans that we have in this report?
Respond. The Carbon Action Plan is not funded fully till 2030. We get funding as and when the various funding pots make themselves available, and we try to utilize them to the best that we can in the various areas that we are operating in. And so I think it stems to the response that was given earlier, that this is a fast-changing environment, and so we don't know. We can't actually start costing what we don't know will be available. But where we can, we are. In terms of the Silvertown Tunnel, I think we've got all the base measurements. We're going to keep monitoring, as Ryan says. But there's also an impetus on us as a local authority to make sure that we are doing the best we can to mitigate against pollution, particularly in that area. And I think I would argue that we are trying to do that through some of the transport strategy actions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite Debbie, Chief Exec, Richard Parkin, who's responsible for repairs and investment, and Kate Wilson, Environmental and Leisure. So do members, we can go straight into the questions. I don't think you need a presentation for each area. So I will open for further questions. Yes, Richard, please. Ryan, please. And Richard.
Chair, is this the end of questions for George Brownell?
Did you have a question? No, I think they're remaining in the room, so if there's a question that comes up for transport, then they'll... Okay, please.
Thank you very much for the report. I thought it was brilliant and really good. Particularly, also pleased to see stuff around like the local area energy planning coming in. I think that's really exciting. I was at a conference about that a few years ago, and I was like, we need to be doing this. But it's really good. In terms of taking everything for what we've heard about funding, timelines, obviously outside global events we have no kind of control over. In my mind, I think the idea that anyone's going to be carbon neutral by 2030 is almost wishful thinking. Like I almost think that, like I'm not sure anyone believes anything. I believe like that can happen in any organisation. Do you think it would be a case of actually when we get, I know you said there's going to be the full reviews of the carbon neutral plan is going to be published in winter 2026. It's kind of the next full review. Do you think at sort of that kind of stage for 2026, we might be in more of a position when we're like, actually, what we can do by 2030 is like X, Y, Z. What we can do by 2035 might be like A, B, C. Or have more of a, because I think my sort of kind of fear around the whole 2030 target is that we sort of get there and we turn around and we sort of say, oh, we didn't make it. But I think quite a lot of organisations might be in that position. But I'm just interested in
Take that from George, because I think it's a political decision to a certain extent. There are going to be challenges, and I do think that next year, the senior leadership team, which is the combined, that involves all the departments, are going to have to sit down and make an informed decision. So at this stage, it's premature for me, for any of us to answer that. But I think certainly coming back next year, we will have some clearer view on whether it's achievable, you know, what the position is. But, you know, I agree with you. The possibilities of achieving those targets are, you know, challenging at best.
Just to add, it's encouraging to see the shift in national policy about grid decarbonisation being brought forward to 2030. It remains to be seen if that's going to happen or not, but for once it's now aligned with our 2030 net zero target. So whilst it is still premature, the policy landscape, as it were, is now somewhat turned a bit more favourably to our own targets.
No, I totally agree, and I sort of I think the 2030 is almost a good a good motivator. Like I think a lot of what is in here is really good, and it's sort of pushing us towards that.
Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, and apologies for lateness, Chair. Yes, likewise, thank you for the report. I mean, when we all set the 2030 target, we knew the facts and you knew how challenging it would be. There's nothing wrong with a hairy, audacious goal to shoot for. And I was struck in this report by the current trajectories on operational forecasts of the council's own emissions, including and excluding council homes. If you take the excluding council homes trajectory, we're on track to cut operational emissions by a third in a decade, which is pretty good. And I think there's a risk of beating ourselves up a bit here. That would be a very good outcome in and of itself. Including council-owned homes is obviously a much less flattering picture. And so I suppose, who is making the decision about the trade-off of where to concentrate the limited resources that we have? So, for example, without getting buried in the detail, the council could do a hell of a lot more and reduce the operational emissions outside of the housing stock by get a marginal gain there, or you could make a bigger contribution to the overall mission by expending that time and effort and resource on the housing stock. And it feels to me that the housing stock needs to be the priority. But my question is a process one. Who's making that decision? Who's got the bird's eye view of it?
I would say I think it's a corporate decision because some of it depends on when funding is made available. So, for example, when we had the LADS 3 funding, we were able to focus on the private sector because funding was available. But even for the small rewards we got, it did take an enormous amount of time and of officers to get that across the line. I mean, Greenwich did really well there, but it did take up more time than you would hope. So as and when these funding streams are becoming available, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is a funding stream that might be able to be bid for that will support housing in terms of the properties that are being procured. So where that hadn't existed before, that will be coming up. So again, a lot of these decisions are dependent on that because we haven't got budgets that are sitting. And another area, I mean, we are looking at using our carbon offset funds from planning to see how we can also utilize that. But, this has been happening from the senior leadership team. Discussions are formulated there. So I think it's working well because, of course, they are sort of you're taking from one pot sometimes to another. So.
Thanks. A question for George, if I may, Chair. The trajectories, do we have trajectories for other local authorities, their own equivalents to this work? It would be helpful to, I know there's the per capita comparison, but for individual trajectories like these really useful charts, do you have any sense of how we are doing versus other local authorities?
So I did do a quick review before coming to the meeting today about other climate strategies because I did think something was going to be asked around this. I can't see, as far as I'm aware, any other local authorities that are doing emissions forecasting to their target dates. So I think we're quite unique in terms of that regard. We are measuring it against a scenario that our consultants developed back in 2019. So we've got our own sort of bespoke modelling which we do that performance management against. I'd imagine a lot of other local authorities have also sought out consultants to do similar exercises. But as far as I can see from public-facing documents, none of them have decided to publish what those scenarios look like or those emissions pathways. So we are, as far as I'm aware, the only ones that are doing that. And I do think it's quite important because it does illustrates quite well how far we are off the target, but also fundamentally how well we have actually been doing against the baseline as well.
Thanks. And final one is on the timeliness of data. So on the operational forecasts, we've got good recent previous municipal year, financial year data, but there's this lag on the borough data, which is, I know that's not outside of our control, but we've only got 2022 figures to go on. So the figure that screamed out of me, as Ryan's here, was transport in 2022 was a 4% increase. And, I'm thinking residents are putting up with a lot on transport, higher charges since then, higher charges, low traffic neighbourhoods, a lot of disruption and a lot of cost. And my worry is, because the data is 2 years old, we're only going to find out that actually it's not been worth that cost for residents and businesses 2 years too late. So my question is, how can we fill that gap? How can we get good data on the transport interventions that we're making to measure the carbon impact much more quickly than 2 years after the event?
So the 4% increase, just to give a bit of context, all local authorities across London did increase, and I think the range was about 3% to 8%. So we are comparatively at the lower end of that increase, which is encouraging to see. However, the point noted about that data lag is important. The only way I could kind of see that we could do that is sort of establish some monitoring controls and get some proxy data, and then sort of try to sort of forecast that and what it might look like extrapolated across the borough. That would be quite an inaccurate science, to say the least, and there is a reason why we do kind of fall back on that 18-month later data tag, purely because we know that those figures do firm up. In terms of actually sort of taking that proxy data, it will be about vehicle type, doing X amount of mileage across certain roads, so it will require an investment into monitoring equipment, essentially, which I think probably Ryan will be a bit more au fait in terms of that sort of technology and stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think next year, like I said, we're doing the action plan. I wouldn't like to commit to bringing any more data forward. We are bringing the road safety review forward because obviously casualty data changes annually, and it really is important for us to put that into our local implementation plan bid. But I think just getting some smart ways of trying to forecast what scheme delivery outputs could be would be the way forward. But again, all of these things cost lots of money to do. Monitoring on schemes is very expensive. So if we can find a smart way of doing that and some data that we can access a little bit easier, potentially from TfL or something like that. But going forward is something that I'd like to roll out as part of all of the scheme and in the early feasibility.
Sorry, can I? You're also not always going to be comparing apples with apples because the data, albeit lagging data, is verified data. You know, so we know that when we're using that data, we can put our names to it. If we're using other forms, it sometimes creates problems. An example is our, which is the other one that you've been working on, where they hadn't got all the data from the local authority. They made lots of assumptions. And so our scorecard did not reflect as well. So sometimes you just need to be comparing like with like.
Yeah, point taken. I don't doubt it's difficult. It's assumptions that I'm worried about, really, because of the change and the assumptions the council is implicitly making that this stuff will work. And perhaps, but thank you for the answer. It's helpful and encouraging. Could I just suggest that as a recommendation, perhaps from the panel, that
absolutely.
We investigate, that we ask that officers investigate, kind of, even if it's inferior data, proxy data, as you said, but more timely data to make sure that transport interventions are delivering carbon reduction.
Thank you, Councillor Hartley. Absolutely, and I just want clarity from Councillor Cole. Did you, when you said the platform we're using, are you referring to what's in the in terms of where the data, the lagging data sits? Are you referring to the UK PN platform? Just wanted clarity because I think, okay, yeah. You don't know the name of the, do you? Okay, all right, thank you for clarity on that. Is there any other question for George before so Councillor Cole, if you could remain in your place, and then we'll take questions on transport whilst Ryan's sitting there, and then we'll go on to housing. So we'll do transport. Any other question on transport? Okay. Okay, please, go ahead.
I'll ask them all at once and save them coming back. Is that all right, Chair? Yeah. So my questions were, you was talking about in the report on a ban on acquisition-only tariffs for gas and electric. So I was wondering how that impacts our carbon-neutral plan. The other interesting thing was it talks about a green skill gap, and is Greenwich actively looking to recruit more green skill apprentices, and do we have enough green infrastructure to support apprentices? I know transport have trained all their staff up with electric vehicles, but I was just wondering if we'd already started that process with green apprentices or if that's something in the future. The other one in the report was talking about lack of funding, but Pippa did say at the beginning that, I believe, if I heard right, you got £6.9 million worth of funding, the external funding. So congratulations on that. I mean, that's amazing. Well done. But I presume that will dry up. So how long will that last? And the other figures in here that I thought were really interesting were the reduction in green waste and landfill. Well, I know most of our waste goes to the centre in Lewisham, Millwall now, and they generate electricity. Do we get any of that electricity, or have we looked? Okay, so is there any way we can get any of it? Because I do believe they got a surplus, but I might be wrong.
Well, you know, when that contract, and that contract is up as is soon up for renewal, but we got a really good deal when we had the contract renewed at the last time. So we'll be looking, as we're obviously renegotiating, but that deal saved us millions. So in terms of value for money, we did get that. In terms of green skills, I'll say to you, I mean, I sit on the tech committee, which is for London, it's run by London councils with all cabinet leads holding my portfolio in all the councils in London. And we're all chasing the same thing. So when there's this sudden rush for, you know, people making, councils having climate emergencies and declaring all of this, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We're all really, so the demand really has outstripped the supply. And universities, colleges, and so on are trying to catch up, if you like, with that. So I think this is one of the big things, and Pippa, because obviously she will tell you in terms of skills.
Thank you, Avril. So the inclusive economy strategy that was agreed the middle of this year, it includes a target or a theme, if you like, a priority theme in relation to the green economy. And already we've had some success with our partner LSEC, the FE College, to secure some funding from GLA to create a green skills lab over at the Greenwich Park site. And then we're also in discussion with the universities in the borough to make sure that the green skills agenda is within the curriculum so that the talent can be secured for local businesses through local FE and HE institutions. So we are really trying to pursue it.
Can I just come on in? Just on the back of that, I do know that there are some FE colleges that are doing the T level in construction, etc., and they've got focus on the you know, making much greener jobs. So are we actually tapping into those sort of resources and recommending that the construction companies that we work with also support that as well?
Yeah, so through our work with Greenwich Local Labour and Business Lab and our relationship with the local developers, in the Section 106 agreement, we asked them to use GLAB, and through that, then the relationship with this pipeline of people with those skills and directing them to the HE and FE colleges to make sure that they're securing them to then fulfil local labour requirements. So yes, we are, and we're trying to expand on that.
Yep, go ahead.
Follow up on that.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Can we visit the lab, the Green Skills Lab, as a panel? Yeah, thank you.
We were due to have a launch, but with the multiple pre-election periods, we haven't, and so it will be in the new year.
Thank you very much, Pippa. Any other question for Pippa and George? Any question for Ryan on transport? I see none. No question for... I've got a question. I think Councillor Coe mentioned the charging points on all fleets of vehicle. I believe that when I read the report, it said that I think our progress is 5.5% of making our vehicles, our own fleets, compatible. What I need to find out is that, I think you mentioned about funding being an issue. Are we doing like a proposal of, maybe a proposal of investments coming forward for charging capacity? I can see Kate shaking her head.
Yes, the whole feasibility study being done, I think it's being carried out by DRES, is looking at, you know, how, I mean, Birchmere would need to be really undergo a whole, if I say dig out, it'll end up making everybody panic, but no, it will need to go through a lot of work to get it done. And the logistics of, you know, having that kind of level of work, because the electric points just haven't got the capacity. So if we're doing that, where would these vehicles be operating from? So it's a whole logistic challenge for the team. So it will be when we see the feasibility study and all the sort of complexities that go with that, that I guess the teams will be able to look at it. But I do have to say that whilst it's not everybody's cup of tea, you know, where we've been able to use biofuels, we've seen a 95% reduction in carbon emissions in some of our vehicles, and we've been doing that to reduce the carbon output at this stage as a meantime.
Councillor Cook.
Thanks. To follow up on the EV charging infrastructure kind of plan, I guess my question is, what steps are being taken to make sure there's sort of adequate infrastructure to meet that 51% target? I know that I've received quite a few complaints from residents who don't feel that they can get an electric car because there's not enough points around to charge their car, and they can't charge at their house because they park on street parking. And I know they were looking into things like going under the pavements, but that didn't seem to be feasible either. So are we able to meet those targets if we don't have the
I'll let
charging
Ryan
points?
answer, because we are having, you know, I think between Lewisham and ourselves, there's been £8 million funding from the Levi organisation. So we're moving very fast in that direction.
Probably not moving fast enough. Obviously, we're talking about our own fleet. We're talking about electrification.
No, we're not talking
but
about
on this
our own
one,
fleet,
yeah, we're talking about residential. Yeah, no, I understand.
Private. Yeah.
So we've got a larger procurement bid that we're working with Lewisham on, and that's in conjunction with London Councils and the Office of Zero Emission Fleet and Energy Saving Trust as well. So we've been working very close with them. We've put in a bid which we're hoping to hear back from at the end of the year, which will see around about 12 to 1,500 residential chargers introduced throughout the whole borough. Alongside that, we decided to do our own procurement because we didn't know which one was going to come first. And our own procurement has probably worked out probably a lot more difficult to deal with than the one we're working with Lewisham on. But we're still on target to have 200 chargers introduced by the end of the financial year. It's a really strange market. It's quite volatile, and even through the immense resource that's been involved on the bid with Lewisham, we're just seeing lots of different splits in terms of income from the viability of the energy. It's really strange market and really new, and a lot of boroughs that we're speaking to haven't quite cracked it yet. Lewisham are in a very similar position to us, doing the exact same thing, trying to get a sort of a quick win, which isn't turning out to be a quick win, in opening up the market to get more charges in the borough. But I'm hoping that with the Levi fund and the Levi bid, rather than providers putting in charges where they know they're going to get people using them, it's going to give us a lot more build, and people will then have the ability to have some in the area, and in time, obviously, then people might switch to those vehicles, and they'll be used a lot more. So it's not necessarily just about profit for some of the organisations.
But I think
I will come in because it is another area that, you know, for me, I look at it from a public liability, safety perspective, people moving homes. There are lots of providers out there that provide these gullies. I'm not aware of any London borough that's trialled and it's really worked. Again, I'm only talking to Lewisham because we're working with them on the bid. But I'm yet to see, you know, one that, you know, really, really works. And that we can ensure that there's no maintenance liability on us as a council going forward as well in terms of upkeep of the asset. But it is an area that we're avidly looking for a solution on, but I'm struggling to find one that really hits the spot at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thanks. Do the lamp column charging points work? You know, some boroughs are trialling lamp columns to charge cars.
Yeah, so the procurement, obviously there's different types. There's the rapid charges and there's the slow to medium charges on lamp columns. I'd say it's probably likely that we won't be tapping into the lamp column and we'd actually be providing charging bollards alongside it, mainly because of the power sources that are needed to do that, and also the structural integrity of the column in some places, and in some places as well, accessibility for vehicles. Because opening car doors and having them in the bays where we need them, there's not, you know, a lamp column every other. We will try to utilise lamp columns, but the charging bollards that we'll be going with will be bespoke and there'll be a lot less sort of maintenance liabilities on them. So, yeah, they're still slow chargers, so to speak, which is what would be added to the column. Does that answer your question? Is that okay? Yeah.
Councillor Hartley.
Thanks, Chair. Just to go back to the at-home charging, I've pestered you both about this before. And I just heard that no London borough has trialled this, but Bromley has. They're only right next door. And I've raised it a few times. And I think it was looked into by officers at some point. That's the Oxford, I think it was Oxford City Council gully sort of system. So that trial was in mid-2023. Did we look into that? Have we evaluated it? And, you know, Lewisham's next door, but so is Bromley. It's an excellent, very well-run council. So we might want to work on the southern border as well.
Yeah, we have looked into it. I would hasten to add that I haven't heard that it's been rolled out and worked in a lot of places. It's been trialled. I can certainly go back to them again and see how many they've installed and how it's performing. And if it is performing well, then maybe I will look to bring that in and offer it as a solution.
That's what I was going to say. You're making all the recommendations tonight, so well done. Thank you. Any other question for Ryan? Thank you, Ryan. Can I invite Richard to come, please? Housing issues. Councillor. Yes, please. Sustainability and the cabinet lead is on ground to answer any of the relevant questions. Are there any questions for? Councillor John Fahy.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions, really. In terms of gas boilers, is there the prospect of moving to air or heat sources over the coming years? And the second point is with regard to the summary of achievements to date on paragraph 4.2, it talks about 600 homes were brought up to standard, but we have a housing stock of 20,000 plus. So how is that going to be achieved within, bearing in mind that the pressures on housing, improving our housing stock is significant? How are we going to achieve that? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So the ambition, I'll answer the first question, then I'll give a bigger picture for the second question, and it might speak to some of Councillor Hartley's points as well earlier. So the ambition is, where appropriate and most likely, we would move to air source heat pumps, and we've done things like we've cross-trained our gas fitters to try and future-proof them and get them to kind of understand air source heat pumps and how we service them going forward. And a lot of the new build properties we're taking on have things like air source, ground source heat pumps, and we've done a few installations ourselves, such as Ernest Dents, where we did a ground source heat pump. So the aim is, and the large ambition for us in housing is to have a carbon neutral stock, zero carbon stock. But this takes on to kind of the second part of the second question, which is what really does that mean? So as I think says in the report, our main aim at the moment is to get all our properties to an EPC-C, Energy Performance Certificate C. And the reason for that is if you put an air source heat pump in, if it's below that standard, then it's probably not going to work. It's probably not going to heat the home, and the cost is going to be extortionate for residents. So it's why kind of the phrase was used, fabric first, fix the fabric, make sure it's insulated, then you can move to things like air source and ground source heat pumps. We did have bid for, and members may be aware that we bid for SHDF, Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, Wave 2 funding. We got 5 million from government, and we put 20 million in ourselves, and that's the 600 properties that we're doing, and of which we've done, I think, as of today, we've done about 117, and the rest are due to be done by next September. So that programme is ongoing. But I think that highlights the issue we've got here and speaks to the earlier point around housing, is that on average you are looking at about £40,000 per home to do this retrofit and do this. And if you think we have got 20,000-ish housing stock, and that works out to about £800 million. And we don't have £800 million in the business plan. The HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, couldn't afford that much right now, and also, as you've said, there is other priorities going on, and the two big levers in my area that I'd point to will be fire safety and the investment in fire safety and things like cladding and improving the fire safety of our buildings, but also clearly there's a priority around damp and mould as well, and making sure that our properties are tackled for that. So, and when you also look at capital spend, and we have got a very ambitious capital programme that members signed off, which was around 480 million over 5 to 7 years. That also includes lifts, it includes kitchens and bathrooms, it includes various aspects. So we've got 480 million for the entire of capital, and we've got an £800 million ask for making our home zero carbon. So I think the comment earlier is entirely correct, which is the ambition is fabulous for us in housing. We really want to get there. The reality of where the funding is difficult. And there is more funding coming out, and we'll be applying for and have applied for, but generally that funding at the moment gets you about £7,500 per home. So it's extra money that we wouldn't have had before, and that's great, but you also then have to find another 32,500 yourself on average to get that home to an EPC-C, where you can put these other things like air source heat pumps in. So that's the scale of the challenge. It's not one we're backing away from, but the reality is it's a lot of money and there's other priorities, and at the moment we couldn't afford to do that across the entirety of our stock. So more is coming. It would need a massive cash injection to do even more and more and more on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Am I correct in saying, because just listening to what you've said and putting monetary value on what it'll cost, am I correct in saying that for the for bringing our properties up to date, sorry, John, microphone.
Sorry.
We could actually cost out that piece of the carbon neutral plan. Is that what you're saying? because it seemed as if with all these projections, we could actually cost out. So then when we're looking at our budget and our capital expenditure, we should actually be looking at the impact that our ambitious target will have on our budget. But I don't see that, you've said it, but I don't see that when I'm listening to budget conversations or when we're having this discussion.
So I think we can put a fairly ballpark figure on retrofit of the entirety of our stock, but the work we've been doing at the moment, and where I quote kind of the £40,000 is street properties, and it gets even more complicated when you're talking about having to retrofit a high-rise building, or with all the building safety elements we have that came in force this year, maybe having to clad a building, what you clad it in to improve its energy performance, doing the windows at the same time, doing the roofs at the same time. So I would imagine it could be even more of an average for those properties when you're doing retrofit on there. But at a very simple level, we're seeing an average of, for street properties, 40,000. 40,000 times 20,000 is about £800 million. Well, it is £800 million. So that's a very rough ballpark, but there's a lot of if, ands, buts in there already. What's already at EPCC or above? What archetypes have we got? Are we talking how many high-rise buildings, medium-rise buildings? What else needs doing to those properties at the same time? So we can give some sense of how much it would cost. There'd need to be a significant piece of work to make that absolutely meaningful, I think.
Thank you. And Avril, why I ask, because I think the conversation tonight, it seemed to be very reactive in how we do these, the action points. So what I was hearing was that we'll look, there's a fund becoming available and then we'll plan towards it. So I wanted to know, can we not have a plan and then source the funding, seek for funding? That's the sort of plan I would like to see us have for 2030. So we've got a plan set out in terms of roughly how much it'll cost, and then we proactively look for funding. So I don't know if that's something your team is already doing in terms of looking for funding.
So, just to sort of echo what Richard said, we do have the ballpark figures in some of the areas of the action plan. So even though when we say the action plan is not fully costed, some of the programs in there up to 2030 have been. So we've done a heat decarbonisation plan for the corporate estate, for example. That, I think, is in a ballpark about £500 million. So once you start adding that to the 800 million, things start to get very, very expensive. So we can definitely work with colleagues across the council to flesh out some of the more costed actions. It does go back to the way we've split up the action plan in terms of, do you want us to cost up the interim 25 actions or the areas of action up to 2030? Because it would make more sense to do the latter, because that will take us to 2030, obviously. But then there's a little bit of less accuracy around that ballpark figure because it's all subject to future funding that may or may not happen. So it's kind of a bit of a tricky balancing act in terms of how much are we going to forecast in the future that we can actually reasonably provide a good estimate of what things are going to cost, and how much are we actually going to sort of have to say we need to kind of sort of wait and see what is actually going to materialise. There's a lot of volatility across all the sort of associated markets. So supply chains are bottlenecking, and that is increasing costs. So things like that, where there are sort of unknown unknowns essentially as well, that could significantly raise costs as well. So it is that sort of balancing that we need to consider.
Thank you. Councillor, Councillor, which one? Oh.
Thank you very much. And I think that the scale of the challenge you're dealing with is like really, really clear. So two sort of questions about housing, and then one's a more political question. But with the housing, sort of bearing in mind what you said about fire safety and damp and mould being obviously really clear priorities as well, is there a particular sort of type or era of our own council housing stock you would prioritise for retrofit that you think would be a more appropriate, I don't know, maybe it's of a particular type of flats or houses or a particular era it was built? And the sort of second kind of housing question is, when you're dealing with sort of buying properties off the open market to sort of help with the temporary accommodation kind of crisis, is that also a factor in there? Sort of like kind of how sort of, I suppose, how insulated these buildings are that when you're buying them from the open market there. And then the slightly more political question for Councillor Lecau, if possible, is in the report, it talks about calling upon the government to do more in funding schemes. And is that a conversation you're having, or is it with the leadership and with local representatives?
Yes, I think if you, as you can see, this the work that we do pans right across the council. So with my cabinet colleagues, we are all having conversations where we can to and not just government, but with the mayor in terms of transport as well. So these conversations are taking place. We are making representations where we can.
I'd probably need to come back to you on the type of kind of archetype and stuff. I've got an incredibly intelligent sustainability manager who could talk for hours and hours and hours about such things. So I'm quite happy to come back to you on those points. But it's anything under EPC-C that we're looking at, and actually when we've done things like SHDF Wave 2, where we put the bid in, we would have done all that work then to say which are the worst type, what archetypes do we need to invest in, and there would have been a lot of data work done around that. But I can provide lots of data afterwards if you want. That's not a problem. The buying properties on the open market is a very interesting one. So there's two, well, there's a few separate pieces, and Pippa may or may not jump in at some point. So we've done large-scale buying of properties such as Greenwich Millennium Village, and that is new build, and you would expect it to be a fairly high EPC and a fairly good standard of carbon efficiency, etc. So in a sense, there's very little concern around those buildings. Other buildings we've been purchasing, there's a street property program where I think we've purchased around 600, I want to say around 600, I think about 600 street properties for temporary accommodation, and they are probably the ones less likely to be, well, I'd say less likely. They're the ones where I don't think we know. We've not got a specific plan around this is the activity we're going to do, and probably at some point we'll be assessing what actions we need to take with those in earnest, because it's getting to quite a 600 properties is not a small number. I think it's the point there though is that one, those street properties are actually general fund. So if you were to invest significant amounts of funds in there, you'd need to find the money from the general fund and general fund capital, and you might have to pay that back. And there's a cost model and a model of kind of maybe borrowing to invest, and does that pay back over the long term, and that's got to be taken into account. And then there's also in the sense of the stuff we're buying, and there are some, and it's all these levers that as a council we've got to pull that say a housing association doesn't have to pull. So there's many housing associations out there who've said, we're not going to do new build anymore, we're not going to buy properties, we're going to just invest in stock because that's all we can do. But they don't have a massive temporary accommodation crisis. And where we need to do both through the HRA and through the general fund, so we can have a greater pool of properties, so we can solve, people in hotels for long periods of time with the children, so we can. So it's all this balance of there's not an unlimited pot of money. What are we going to spend money on? And the priority around the street purchasing program has been, let's get people out of expensive temporary accommodation into much better settled housing, not necessarily energy efficiency on those. So not to say we're not thinking about it, I won't look at it, but that's a priority for those schemes.
Thank you. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. That £800 million figure is eye-watering, and there was that national announcement last month of £1 billion in private sector lending, in bank lending for retrofitting. And what you're saying is that would just about cover one London borough, Greenwich. But that National Wealth Fund announcement, is that access to that lending? Does that come in? Is that sort of on your radar? Is there any way that can be applied? And just thinking more broadly about the private sector, one thing that does mark London boroughs and Greenwich out is the sheer level of development. And is there any opportunity to access developers' buying power to bring down our costs, that £40,000 cost per house? Is there anything we can do to kind of take advantage of the private sector activity in the borough?
I think this is an area where I'm not going to trip myself up trying to talk about something I don't know. I don't know the answer to those questions, to be honest. The funding I'm aware of for retrofitting our houses, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and there's been a new round of funding, and that's the 7,500 per property that I've referenced. The other areas of funding I'm not particularly knowledgeable on, and I don't want to trip myself up on that. And I'm not sure if Pippa has anything on the developers' buying power. I think just Pippa may or may not want to come in on that. The only thing I'd reflect on is a comment from earlier, which is, you know, could we do more in council housing if that was our kind of focus as a council? I think it's good to remember that the council housing is the housing revenue account. We spend housing revenue account money on our housing, and spending general fund money on housing, I think it legally could be done, but it's generally not done. And of course, the general fund has massive pressures in itself, and we can't spend housing revenue account money on the general fund properties either. So there is that difficulty of, you know, two pots of money, both of which are stretched, and that investment piece. But
Thanks, Richard. So I think we'd have to check procurement regulations, so I won't want to commit one way or the other. I suppose the difference with the challenge that Richard has and what developers do is developers are constructing new, they're not retrofitting. So I suspect that we can learn quite a lot in terms of how developers are using new technology so that we become more informed and educated about what works well and what doesn't. But I think it might be difficult to think that there are many opportunities where the bulk purchase and economies of scale would be achieved, because I don't think necessarily we will be looking to purchase exactly the same things. I mean, we may, but you know, and it would be dependent upon the developer's willingness as well. So I'm not sure is the answer, but it is something that we could test out in terms of an initial conversation with procurement, and then just see whether there's any appetite from some of the developers that we know better than others.
Thank you. You've managed my expectations very well. It just feels like there's two dots that potentially might be joined, and we're at in the unique position of having some leverage. And also, this is bang on developers' CSR priorities. You know, they should want to be funding this. Thank you. And just to reassure Richard, we come to meetings and talk about things that we don't know about all the time. So, kind of my last question is from the macro to the micro. You've talked a lot about the big challenge. We've also got, the council also has the repairs transformation programme underway. We've got people out in properties daily doing minor repairs. What's in place to kind of not walk past problems at the, again, very micro level? You know, how are we ensuring that easy fixes, broken windows, dislodged insulation, holes in roofs, that, you know, of the kind that you do find, are, you know, how is it being prioritised in that very small scale through the repairs work? What's the join?
just to say, I'd go to meetings and talk about stuff I don't know all the time, just not on camera when I'm being recorded, so it's slightly different. So I think it's a good question, Councillor, a good question to raise, and to be honest, our repairs transformation programme has been about how we can get a better service through to the customers, not really looked through the lens of carbon neutral. And to be honest, I've never thought of that myself, because I've got carbon neutral plans in one area, and we've got capital in one area, and we've got repairs and priorities and timeliness and quality and all that. So I think I'll take that one away, if you don't mind, Councillor, have a think about how that might work. But,
the repairs and investment team do very helpfully send over some indicative carbon figures where they implement energy efficiency work, so they are really helpful in terms of the whole data collection process as well. That's good to hear. Could I throw those two recommendations in, joining the dots on private sector investment and linking up with the repairs transformation programme, if I may, Chair?
I do hope you... I'm struggling to keep up with the recommendations, but yes, I will take those on board. In addition to that, this is a very useful point, and this is on the same, linked into what you said, but more on the transport. So when we send our staff, so it's more like a RBG staff model shift kind of position that we need to take generally when we send staff out, when staff are going out to do repairs work as well. Could we do something about the wasted journey back and forth? So maybe looking at the jobs which are logged the location, that sort of thing, than having 3-4 visits going to the same area. If we could tie that up, because I think that would also reduce the travel time and contribute to our footprint. I think we can piggyback that on the recommendation that Matt made. Yeah? Councillor Leo Fletcher.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say on that, I did have this conversation with Richard's predecessor, Neil Avril, who was on the repairs panel, and the suggestion was at the time was that if you knew you had 15 jobs in Greenwich, far into Greenwich, Deptford, you could fill the van with the materials for the week, and the operative, because most operatives takes the van home, could then spend a week doing them jobs rather than going from Greenwich, from Deptford to Birchmere, picking up the job, going to the stores, picking up the stores, all the way back daily, and they was looking at linking that with multi-skilled tradesmen, so he could go straight in, do the plumbing, do the electrical and the tiling. But I know probably not on your radar because I know you've had a lot more stuff to do. But
so just Chair and Councillor Fletcher, just to give assurances that actually the planning of how we do work and the travel time, etc., is one of the many things we talk about a lot in repairs, and it's got so many wins. It's got wins around carbon neutral, but it's also got wins around the efficiency of our trade staff. It's got wins around how well we're serving customers. It's got wins around how much money we save on not doing those journeys backwards and forwards. It's win, and it's a big conversation we have on our planning system and how we can plan correctly and not have people driving backwards and forwards in the borough all the time. So it's an absolute key focus, just from simply running a business. And if you did it just from I want to run a direct labour organisation business and I want that to be as cheap as possible, then you'd not want people driving backwards and forwards in the borough. But it also adds to those wins such as carbon neutral. So it's a conversation that's live and we have often about how we can best achieve that. And that is something that the transformation team is looking at and addressing.
Councillor Cook.
Cool, thank you. It seems like there's been some positive progress on kind of, I guess, decarbonising our maintained schools, which obviously helps school finances with cheaper energy costs, hopefully. I just wanted to ask, what's the status of sort of energy audits, I guess, for schools following this work? And I'm sorry if I missed that somewhere in the report. And is there any other more funding, like the funding that was asked that we got anywhere else, so that we can keep doing that, supporting our schools?
So with regards to the energy audits, they do take place routinely as part of doing the public sector decarbonisation scheme. So we do have to provide a really good evidence in terms of actually putting that bid together. We've been talking about how we might be able to roll that out and do all of the maintained schools and achieve that sort of economies of scale. It's very expensive to do that. So we've been trying to sort of figure out how we can sort of identify funding such as the Low Carbon Skills Fund, for example, which is similar to the PSDS, but it's more about actually those sort of feasibility studies. So when the next time the window opens for that sort of funding application, we're going to try and bundle the schools up and see where we can align with that. But it's a work in progress.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Richard? No? Thank you, Richard. I think, Pippa, you might as well stay there, back and forth. May I invite Kate Wilson now to we'll talk about everything waste. Thanks, Kate, for coming in. Do we have any question for Kate? Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so my question is on electric dust carts. Simple question, do they work? If we are going to procure electric dust carts, do we get them on a 3-month trial period to see if they work before we purchase? Because I know when we retrofitted the green one, the old Dennis dust cart to electric, it spent a lot of time in the yard because of mechanical issues, electrical issues. So I was just wondering whether we're looking at the pitfalls, because I know everyone, I mean, we're all on electric, but if it doesn't work, then there's no point in us purchasing it. I just wonder what your thoughts was on that, really, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Fletcher. I mean, look, when we enter into all of these conversations about moving across to electric vehicles, I can absolutely assure you that the team will give a very robust and rigorous assessment of all of the vehicles that are open to them. And as time goes by and new products emerge into the market, because it's a constantly evolving market. So they will take all of that into account, because you're right, from 5 years ago there's been improvements in technology, so it doesn't stand still. So, but to absolutely answer your question, we will look for the best value that the market has to offer in moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. My question's on recycling. So this panel a year ago recommended one of the two recommendations that weren't accepted by Cabinet, the minority that weren't accepted. One of them was that we didn't think the recycling target of 5% increase was anywhere near ambitious enough. And that wasn't accepted by Cabinet. And at 5.2 in this table, it says action status, household recycling rate at 29%. Is that right? Below the baseline of 33% from 2019.
Yes, that's right. That is accurate.
So what's going on there? You know, we've got a lower than baseline recycling rate, despite the move to fortnightly collections and all of the comms and engagement that's gone in. Are you expecting to see that rise as a result of Towards Zero Waste, and how much?
Yes, so the actual rise is 3.8% in 22-23. So we're very much on track to turning that around.
So where did the fall? There must have been a huge fall around the pandemic time, 2020. If it was 33% in 2019, and we're sort of saying we've done well because we've done a 3% increase, you know, we're not even back to where we were just before the pandemic.
No, absolutely. The pandemic was absolutely the reason for that drop. So, but we're confident that we'll continue to build on that, albeit even 1% increase is incredibly difficult to achieve. So we're actually thrilled that we've made the 3.8% as a result of the move to fortnightly residual waste collection. But we have got a lot more to do to get near to the 50% mark that the London Mayor is asking of us. And
the big problem is flats, isn't it? And what specifically, you know, in terms of, you know, 80-20, where's our effort going into flats, I assume, and improving the recycling rate from flats? What specifically are we doing about that aspect of the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So flats are the eternal problem, because obviously they don't have their individual bins for us to collect. They go into a communal bin, and all it takes is for one resident to contaminate that, and then your whole 240 litre, 1,000 litre bin has been contaminated, so gets written off. So we're doing a number of things with our Street and Waste Advisor service in trying to capture what are the things that are preventing people from recycling responsibly. There's other things, so for example in sorry.
It's okay. But, and as an example of the challenge that we face, you know, the fact that we only moved 3-point-something% with that whole massive shift in the way we collected waste just illustrates the challenge. The other thing is that more and more developments that are coming into the borough are in terms of flats. So we do really need to do some work in that. I know that the team has been going out. We used to send teams out to kind of talk to people a lot, but we're being challenged by some of the squeezing of our budgets, aren't we, Kate?
Yeah. Sorry, apologies, Councillor. I lost my words for a moment. In Greenwich Peninsula, for example, obviously modern developments are much better placed with the technologies and the way that the development is built to allow easier collection of the waste. But the trouble is we don't have enough of those developments operating in that way to justify us purchasing the new vehicles, for example, that will allow us to do that, for example. So as the developments come on, that will allow us to bring the right vehicles to collect them in a more efficient way, which would hopefully see a rise in the recyclable items.
Thank you, Kate. Can I just check, maybe with Pippa, in terms of development, and are we able to investigate if, you know, if we can phase in a requirement for new construction to be, to aim for a zero emission within the borough? I don't know if that's it's not a planning matter. I'm just wondering if that's something that can be investigated as we plan towards a 2030 or move towards our 2030 target. So is that something that can be investigated?
Thank you. Yes, so at the moment we're preparing a supplementary planning document, which is a effective replacement of a previous Greener Greenwich SPD. And so within that, it will have guidance to landowners, developers, applicants on what we would expect to see in terms of technology and what impact that has on the development, so that there's a sort of suite, if you like, of the choices that they could make that we would find acceptable. So when that's not quite in draft form yet, so we haven't shared it with the Cabinet member, but as and when that's been with the Cabinet member, I'd be happy to bring it to scrutiny so you can see or share it through the normal processes in terms of getting a member engagement so you can see what's proposed, because obviously it would need to be adopted by Cabinet.
Thank you. Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair. On the point of waste on our flats and all of that, seems to me over the years that the frequency of collections is a problem, because collections, well, the bins are mostly full weekends, obviously, but are never collected weekends. And so therefore the rubbish is mixed, and so therefore that in my view causes a problem. So therefore is there a mechanism of altering the rounds so that the collections can be more frequent on flats and therefore reduce the problems that Councillor Hartley's identified. The other point I wanted to make is in terms of the landfill, what impact, if any, is that likely to have in terms of the changes that have taken place in relation to meeting our targets? Thanks.
Well, very simply, the impact that it will have on landfill, it will significantly reduce the amount of waste that we are taking to landfill, and it's significantly a low figure at the moment. Could you repeat your first question, please?
Frequency of collections on in our flats, in our platted areas.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, obviously, we're about to embark on looking at the way that we collect our waste and moving towards a single waste collection. So at the moment, you'll be aware that we do double collections with the green waste and recycling in the morning and the household waste in the afternoon. We're working towards moving towards a single collection. So all of that will be considered in that piece of work, and if there are any recommendations to be made for doing more frequent collections for flatted properties, we can build that into that piece of work.
And just to add that moving to the single shift would give us the capacity that we lack at the moment to be able to do things like that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Fletcher?
Yeah, I know we got waste on the housing scrutiny panel, and the questions John was asking about the paladins, the big paladins on the council estates, rather than street collections. But I think that's a bigger conversation between housing and waste on recycling infrastructure. I think it's a huge project, but it was mainly bin collections on council estates rather than street properties.
Our capacity will grow when we change the shift system. So we'll be able to have that capacity is what I'm saying. So yes, have that conversation nevertheless, but I think we'll be in a better position to be responsive to the issues raised.
Thank you. And just checking in terms of waste, before I bring you in, Councillor Cook, how do we, I don't know, so it might be a silly question, how do we transport our waste? Is it a sustainable means of transport? Do we use EV vehicle? Is it by river? I don't know. So I don't know if you could just educate me.
We use the vehicles that you see coming to your doorstep to pick up the rubbish. But as I said earlier, a lot of our vehicles are using biofuel. And the biofuel has enabled us, not only is it slightly cheaper now, but it's has the result of a 95% reduction in the carbon emissions.
So, you know, earlier you said that our contract, our agreement for the incineration was coming up for renewal. Is that
in a couple of years? I mean, it's not like
it's not like
week.
Okay.
It's not next week. It's 2029.
Oh, okay.
But these are long negotiations, is what I was trying to say. These things take time, and you know we have to. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could just say, we're in the process of developing our latest waste strategy, which includes all of the forms of waste disposal, obviously, which are services that cost us over £11 million a year at the moment. So we're just in the early stages of doing that, but that will set the tone for coming years.
Thank you. Very helpful. Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Following on from the questions about contaminated recycling in flats, I don't know if this is more of an issue for me in my ward, but I seem to get a lot of complaints about contaminated waste in HMOs. And I don't know, and maybe this isn't the right place for it, but I don't know if there's any more that's being done, because it doesn't feel like I get regular casework about that bins never getting taken outside of HMOs because they're always contaminated, and obviously that's not doing anything for our recycling levels. Thanks.
You know, I get a lot of casework on this, so it's some people will argue that you need to give more bins to HMOs. And others will say the more bins you give, the more rubbish is generated. And it's very, very challenging because, you know, if it's one household, then there's a point of responsibility at some point. And as you know, with the other systems, we were able to send the three letters and a strike. But what we try to do is work with our partners and our teams to try and get these HMOs when we know that they're registered. Some of them are not. Some we identify as HMOs on the basis of the rubbish that's generated. So it is a problem, and it's not just for your ward. yes, I know your ward has a high number of HMOs, but it's a challenge that we're trying to work with. And education, I think, is always the best thing. But the turnover in these HMOs, you know, is very often quite high. So we might send some teams to talk to people today, and 5 months down the road, it's a whole different group living in there.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on to that excellent question, a really good question. Do we engage with the landlord as well? Because make it a problem for the landlord and they will make it a problem for the tenant.
Yeah, absolutely. That is part of the conversation that we have. It's kind of like a three-way process between ourselves, the tenants and the landlord, because ultimately it is their responsibility to provide sufficient ways for their tenants to be able to comply with what we need them to do.
I think that's an interesting point, because I think when we raise caseworks, I think there seemed to be a pushback to say, you know, we're not the landlord. So I think hearing that, we'll be pushing when we submit caseworks as well, so that that three-way conversation can happen, because whilst it's on paper, it should happen, I don't think it's happening enough. So I think that's something we'll pick up in terms of the caseworks. Do we have any other question? No other question? Yeah.
What are you basing that on?
Basing it on individual caseworks. So when we submit casework and the responses. So I'm saying what Kate said is interesting, but we're not seeing that when we get responses for when we put in raise similar concern.
Okay, so but effectively you need the teams to be explaining the process that they've gone through so that you are understanding of that. Maybe that's what we're not doing, but okay.
There are no other questions. What we're going to do, because there's been quite a few recommendations and things to follow up on. Okay, no, go ahead.
And maybe it is the waste section, I'm not sure. Well, so, very small. You know, the Woolwich Library of Things, that seems to, it's small, but, you know, it has had some success. Are we looking to expand that to some of the other libraries in the borough?
But I mean, I think you can see the results have been really good. For £47,000 of things that people could have bought that they've not needed to buy. And I think what our challenge was to be able to, you know, again, resources in the expansion of that program. If we had it in all areas, it would be wonderful. But it is about resource and storage and so on and so forth. But you know, as we develop and we see areas that we can find money to do that, and we, you know, did you want to say something, Kate?
Yeah, just to, go ahead. To add to that, I think where we can really help is by helping to promote the Library of Things, because I think although there's an established user group, I think there's a lot of people that don't know it exists. So that's another way that we can try and increase the usage and then obviously if the time comes, then we can look at expanding it in other places.
Thank you, Kate. We're going to invite Debbie now. There might be some strategic, high-level question, specifically around how we manage or how we plan our budgets, and how our 2030 target, how does it feed into, how do we weave that into the whole overall structure? So I believe Councillor Hartley will start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Debbie. We've made recommendations on the Audit and Risk Management Panel before about risk in relation to the carbon neutral plan. And I think I'm right in saying that PIP is the risk owner for the top level strategic risk. And a point I've raised a few times is that I think it should be you, because the carbon neutral plan is so cross-cutting, like the MTFS. It's very clear that the risk owner is Damon for the MTFS, but for both the MTFS and carbon neutral plan, the buck kind of stops with you. So I just wonder what your view was on that. Why have we got one individual on GMT, a risk owner?
Thanks, Councillor Hartley. I thought the buck stopped with me on everything, so it was quite refreshing to see someone else's name in the box. I mean, you know, in practical terms, you know, everything comes back to me, so I don't really have any objection either way. If it's Pippa's name there, it still means me in my mind. You know, that we are one of the same, but yeah, that's my response.
Okay, fair enough. The second question is about, I find these sessions fascinating, and it's really great, and I'm a big admirer of George's work. I find them also very frustrating, because it seems on all of this stuff, we've got 32 London boroughs trying to do the same thing, feeling around in the dark, because it's new. We're doing some things very well, others are no doubt doing some things very well. So from your role as London Borough Chief Exec, you know, what's the broader landscape? Are there efficiencies and economies of scale? Do you talk about that with other chief execs across London? That kind of question.
Yeah, I mean, the London picture is very much that there is a lead London Chief Exec for this. I am the lead London Chief Exec for Finance. Out of my Chief Exec group, we kind of take an overarching responsibility. Part of that is to keep our brethren as well informed as we might be by being in the right conversations with the right people and sharing that information. I think everyone thinks that every London borough is the same, and actually we are quite different. We're grappling with different things at different times for different reasons. You've heard, you know, £800 million to put air source heat pumps in every one of our council properties. There's always this competition going on for resources and capacity to do these things. In terms of that £800 million ask, we can't borrow £800 million because we haven't got the revenue capacity to pay it back. We are concentrating on those who have no homes at the moment, very much so, and that's a laser focus we have as an organisation. And if that is to the detriment of the work that we've discussed this evening, then unfortunately that's the reality what we are being asked to do as a business in support of our residents and our communities. So that push and pull is happening everywhere across London, across the UK, quite frankly, in every council, wherever it is. So we share information, we talk. A lot of the information we share is there's a new funding pot, let's bid. We share information on how to bid for those. If there's a magic button to press, you know, we all let each other know about it. We may bid on a London-wide basis through London Council's tech. You know, there are lots of different routes, but essentially we are waiting for national government, you know, to open a door somewhere and to invite us in, and we all crowd in as quickly as possible so that we can get a piece of that action. But paying for all of this ourselves is just an impossible task. So that's the name of the game, and that's how we've been able to progress as much as we have progressed, is by being successful in bidding for pots of money. But there isn't a pot of money that says, here, you can have an air source heat pump for every one of your council properties, particularly when we're tackling damp and mould, as Richard has said, fire safety. That's top of the hierarchy of needs, unfortunately. And that's where the organisation will focus. And that's just reality, I'm afraid.
Any Councillor Fahy, sorry.
Thank you for your comments, and they're appreciated. Do I detect from the comments you make that effectively the discussion we're having this evening magnifies the challenge in terms of resources and competing resources, both within the 32 London boroughs and within the borough itself in terms of the objectives? So as a consequence of that, is it likely that the plan before us this evening is likely to be frustrated by the lack of resources longer term? Because government have a pot of money, 32 London boroughs bidding for it, it then becomes small change in reality. So is there likely to be a continuing review as to the priorities within the plan?
I think to deliver the plan by 2030, as it's currently set out, we will need the national agenda to work with us, I think is what I'm saying to you. We cannot do this on our own. We cannot do it as a group of 32 London boroughs. We cannot do it as a sector, a public sector, local authority group. We need to see where the legislation goes, where how the funding matches those changes in legislation, where customer behaviour goes. We're hearing about electric cars, this week. The motor industry is not going to be producing many more because there isn't a market for them. But why is that? So that everything's got to come together and work together to generate the outcome that we are seeking. I think what George and others have described is it's very difficult to look 5 years ahead to know what that context, what that environment might look like. But we all travel in hope, we aim high, we have ambition, we have aspiration, and we can't let that stop us. But we aren't in the driving seat, pardon the analogy. We're not in the driving seat on this, John. We can articulate exactly what we need and why we need it. But then we're waiting, for significant national shifts to facilitate that delivery. But in the meantime, we will push on. We're creating exemplars, examples that can win hearts and minds and pockets, and encourage others that can install their own air source heat pump, to do so. So, you sell the dream, you sell the idea, the benefits and everything else. But that's difficult to do with a family living in a cold, damp property. And as Richard said, you've got to grapple with that first. That's top priority before you even think about installing an air source heat pump. So that's the push and pull that we are living in, unfortunately.
Thank you, Debbie. And it's good that you are sitting at this table. I think at the beginning, Avril said we can't compare apples with pear in terms of different councils doing different things. But as Councillor Hartley set out, I think you mentioned Bromley. So there are councils who are doing good on some things. We're doing good on some things. So at the table where you share those best practices, is there a feel that generally there need to be a renewed ambition, resetting of targets across the 32 London boroughs? But also internally, you've got oversight. What I heard tonight, there are some directorates which are doing great, and then others, I don't think we're doing the joint thinking where we can do more. So I just want to get your feel, your honest view in terms of what we can do more as a borough, but also, what message you can send out there in terms of maybe overall we need to look at this policy again, look at if it's too ambitious and whether it needs to be stretched maybe 2035. It could be that other London boroughs are thinking the same. So if you could share your views on that.
Yeah, sure. These are just my views, but I think every council in London is just struggling to survive at the moment. I think it's really as simple as that. We have more than half a dozen who are in exceptional financial support conversations. This is about doing the basics that we need to do for our communities, and that includes finding accommodation for those that are homeless. So whilst it's there's a huge commitment to the delivery of this, we're being very much put on the back foot because of all the other issues that we are grappling with. And they are numerous and they are hugely challenging. I've never seen the numbers, you know, funding gap numbers, overspend numbers in my 40-year career. I've never seen the numbers as big as this. We used to shake if we had £1 million overspend. Now we're talking 40, 50 million in some London boroughs. You know, it's just enormous. In terms of whether we should shift from 2030 to 2035, for me, that's the choice as to how ambitious you want to be or how realistic you want to be. And it's that balance, isn't it? And, you know, I'm a glasses half full person. I think you should aim high, and then you should be able to explain why you haven't reached that target, and you have a mature discussion about that rather than a blame discussion. I would say to my children, well, if you aim too low, I'm going to be very suspicious of that because I think you can do better than that. So it's a matter for you as politicians and us as officers to reach a position on that date. But I also think that the date in many respects is meaningless. It's what you do that matters. It's the actions, it's the differences that you make along that journey that are critical. And as I said, around air source heat pumps, people have to believe in what you're doing. They have to buy into the objectives that you're setting yourself. And if you can just get a few hearts and minds in that, it always amazes me how that spreads without too much effort from the local authority, actually. So, you know, pushing on with good examples, you know, showcasing, you know, potential. Technology is shifting all the time. That's the bit that no one's got a handle on. I heard, you know, they're developing a car battery that can go thousands of miles after one charge. Well, that's going to talk discussions about EV charging will be very different discussions if you've got that technological capability on our streets. How long is that going to be? I heard 4 years, 4 to 5 years, that it's already in train. So should we spend, you know, lots of money expanding our national grid, you know, to plug in thousands and thousands of cars when that technology is on the horizon? And these are all really difficult calls for organisations to make who have really good intentions and you know, good high levels of aspiration. So they're just my views, Chair.
Thank you. No, I think your views are very important. As you said, you sit at the top, so the buck stops with you. So I think it's important for us to hear that coming from you. Do members, any other question for?
It's not a question, obviously. You know, I want to conclude this by saying that when we set out the ambitions with the carbon neutral plan, it didn't come with some big budget. It was saying, go and look within the departments to see what you can do to achieve these goals. And I am very, very proud to look at the achievements that we've made in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. I think we've done a jolly good job, and I would just have to say thank you, a big thank you to the officers for the work that they've done.
I think we all echo that. I think it's a difficult conversation, but it's so important as well. And I think one thing I would say, there's a lot of talk about the delivery, the actions. What's important is the finances, because everything we need money, and there's a challenge across. Our budget is already tight. We're having to tighten our belts in different areas. So I think being realistic as well. Yes, we do have the targets, but then we have to be reasonable and measured and try to balance that with the needs of the community. I think our messaging could be better in terms of the climate updates, in terms of where we are to the wider public. I think the residents would really benefit from hearing, or for us to celebrate some of the successes as well, because I think we've done quite a lot, but that hasn't filtered down in the community. So maybe that's something as cabinet members and officers, when you're sending information out, is to try and deliver that message across the borough. Yeah, I think that would be, yeah. I think that's it really. I didn't capture all the recommendations, so don't know if you could help me with what we've got, please. The list of recommendations.
Can we review it after the meeting? I've got it all in my notes. I'll circulate it to the panel.
Okay, brilliant. And we'll check.
Sorry, Chair, did we include in the recommendations the annual targets identified for each year? So we haven't, when we receive reports, then we know exactly each target, where it is and where it's moving to. I don't think we need to check about a number of social housing in Bromley. I think they may have 2 or 3. They may have a few more. I'm not sure.
We'll circulate the recommendations. We'll look at it and feedback. Let me know if there's anything that was mentioned that's been missed. Just want to say thank you all for giving up your evening. Debbie, thank you for coming. It's good to see. It's a delight actually to see you at this meeting. Show how important we are as a council towards meeting our target. It's difficult, but yeah, I think this evening is good to hear what's happening. Thank you very much. No.
Sorry.
Item number 6. Item number 6. Sorry, the meeting's not yet finished. Forward plan. It's finished for the officers, not for members. Item number 6, the last one. The forward plan. So this is just for us to note the upcoming executive decisions set out in the forward plan for the period of November to February 2025, and that's in Appendix 1, and for us to determine if there's any item that we need to bring back for scrutiny. Noted. Thank you. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you.